Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Oxford City Council Cabinet on Wednesday, 9th of July from the Town Hall. Let us start with the usual apologies for absence. I'm not aware of any. Can I check you? Don't want any? No? Okay. Need to make? Not seeing any. We have no notified addresses and questions by members of the public or council addresses on any items for decision or neighbourhood issues or items raised by cabinet members. So that takes us on to the scrutiny report. And Alex, I think you're online to talk to that. So over to you.
Thank you very much. So scrutiny met on the 1st of July and we had 3 substantive items. And additionally, the Housing and Homelessness Working Group had met on the 24th of June and they had considered 2 cabinet reports. So the items I'll report on today, and I'll take them in turn. Firstly, the domestic abuse policy for service users. And then I'll move on to talk about tourism and then the citizen experience strategy before ending on the working group reports. So, in terms of the domestic abuse policy for service users, firstly, can I express my thanks to Councillor Arshad, to Liz Jones and to Richard Adams for coming along to the meeting and talking to us. It was a really, really productive discussion. We obviously looked at the policy in some detail, and I think it was generally a very, very good piece of work that speaks to some of the fantastic things the council is doing. So I think we all wanted as a committee to sort of appreciate the way in which the policy had been drafted. Some of the things we talked about was the sort of context of temporary accommodation. There was some discussion around clarifying the mechanisms and timescales, nothing that culminated in a recommendation, but some really useful discussion there. We also talked around the importance of prevention, as well as what the approach would be to dealing with children under the age of 16. The one thing that culminated in a recommendation was a discussion of Section 3, the diversity implications. And basically, there was, in the preamble to that section, there were some notes made around how immigration status might affect someone's ability to come forward and as a survivor of domestic abuse. But the committee felt that this section could be stronger in directly identifying directly identifying the ways in which fear of deportation or immigration status could result in someone being at risk of domestic abuse and could get in the way of their willingness to disclose that. So it was a recommendation for an addition to Section 3, in effect. Given the number, it might possibly be useful if it was okay to get responses and then to come back and talk about the other items so we can keep position.
Thanks very much, Alex. I think in the room, we lost the screens for a moment, but we could all still hear you. So I'm now going to ask Councillor Arshad if she respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Scrutiny for their recommendation. And just so you know that we do appreciate the importance of this issue, especially given Oxford's status as Council of Sanctuary. And we partially agree with the recommendation. So we've added an additional bullet point to Section 3.4 of the policy to include and highlight the fear of deportation. So this fits with the overall style of the policy and clearly communicates that the City Council acknowledges and validates the concerns of those victims, survivors of domestic abuse, and is committed to supporting them. So I think this approach balances not just the clarity required, but within the framework as well of the policy, but also the inclusivity and practical support for those affected. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lubna. Alex, back to you for the next item.
Thank you very much. So the next item we discussed was a scrutiny commissioned item, and it was an item around tourism. The discussion focused quite significantly on the role of the City Council in facilitating a process in looking at an accommodation business improvement district. So thank you to Councillor Hollingsworth and Diana Fawcett for coming along and discussing it with us. This was a very, very useful and quite extended discussion. I think some really, really important points were drawn out. So firstly, I think it was very useful to the committee, and particular thanks to Councillor Hollingsworth and Diana for the number of questions they took on this, for us to have a chance to ask questions about the nature of an accommodation business improvement district and how it could be implemented within the city, particularly to clarify the City Council's role as a facilitator and to start to look at what the governance structures in such an entity might be. There was also some useful discussion around where the funding could be used, sort of clarifying, for example, what it meant for it not to be able to be used on council services, and what improvements could be made by the decision makers within that framework. So I think that was some really useful clarity that came out of that discussion. There was also some discussion around some of the negative impacts of tourism in Oxford, such as overcrowding, as well as some of the limitations of the city itself in terms of issues around the number of public toilets. Other discussion reflected on diversifying the delivery of tourism, i.e. Attracting a wider range of different groups, and also trying to look at some of the issues around the current status and operation of the hospitality sector in the city and seeking some clarifications around paying conditions for workers within that sector. All of the discussion culminated in two clear recommendations. The first was that the City Council should take further steps to publicise the locations of public toilets. Obviously, these are accessible not just to tourists, but to everyone in the city. So there was a real sense from scrutiny that we should be doing more, basically, to make clear where public toilets are available, so that they are clearly signposted to all residents as well as tourists. And the second recommendation was basically that we should have the highest possible level of elected representation within the ABID task groups, noting the limitations of the scheme, so not trying to go beyond our role as a facilitator, but basically that where the City Council has a role, we should try to the extent possible to ensure there is democratic accountability.
Thank you, Alex Powell. Over to Alex Hollingsworth.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a really interesting and I thought very good session with scrutiny. The questions were wide ranging, they were detailed, and I think everybody left very clear about what exactly this is and therefore what it isn't, what the appropriate ways to proceed, and so on. Always something of a challenge when you're trying to inform about a complex issue, and I felt that the scrutiny were entirely clear about what it was. It was quite entertaining to discover the BBC weren't the following morning. I'm not sure if they've corrected every one of the errors on their website, but we'll see one day. So on the precise recommendations, first one, we have a lot of material already publicising where publicly accessible toilets are, but there is no such thing as too much of that kind of material. So we will look through to see what else we can do. Electronic form is the most usual because that's what most people use now, obviously, but there are opportunities for physical forms, whether that's printed or signage and things like that. So just keep it under review and make sure that we're always doing the maximum we can possibly think of to prioritise that. And then the wording of the recommendation and the response to it, I think both reflect the importance of understanding that we are the facilitator, not the decision maker in the ABID. And so the crucial thing for us is to ensure it proceeds well, that we are engaged with that, that we're not seen as trying to dictate what it should and shouldn't do. And we can look at other examples around the country where businesses thought they were being dictated to and as a result voted against it. So clearly it is really important. So the response reflects, I hope, what the Scrutiny Committee were looking for, and we'll see how things go. I hope positively as we move forward.
Thanks, Alex. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you. So the final report considered by scrutiny on the meeting on the 1st of July is the citizen experience strategy. Firstly, thank you to Helen Bishop and Vicky Galvin for coming along and speaking with the committee. Again, I think this was a really positive discussion. There were some concerns around the ways in which feedback was being gathered and sort of the voices that were being heard and concomitantly those which may not be being heard, and that culminated in one of the recommendations, which I'll come to in just a minute. There were also some discussions around how we do our engagement with younger people, particularly people, say, between the ages of 12 and 16, and how that might sort of operate in terms of instilling faith in authority and democracy. There was quite a lot of discussion around AI and some of the notes about AI within the policy, and that again culminated in one of the recommendations, which I can say a little bit more about in a minute. There was also a discussion around sort of demographics within the city and how they may intersect with the sort of digital by default parameters that we've been moving towards. So, you know, for example, whether people with certain conditions may find automated systems more difficult to use. And there were some really useful clarifications given by Helen and Vicky around that. So thank you both for that. And finally, there was a point raised around the importance of contingency planning, particularly in light of recent experiences that we have all shared, in which, as was referenced in the previous meeting, scrutiny particularly experienced. So just a sort of question there around how we could ensure that as digital facilities play more and more of a role, we are not making ourselves vulnerable to outages and incidents. So that culminated in 3 recommendations. The first was that Cabinet consider incorporating physical presence more into future consultations. So particularly the request here was that there would be a focus on areas outside of the city centre, and also that where possible, various forms of language and interpreter support would be incorporated within this. Secondly, we asked that the environmental and equality impacts of AI use should be considered as core parts of the full review of the citizen experience strategy in 2027. And there was a request that dedicated sections addressing the implications of AI be incorporated within that strategy. And finally, we asked for proactive efforts to be made to consult children under 12 in recognition of the city's commitment to being an age and children-friendly city.
Thanks very much, Alex. Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex, for those recommendations. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there, but I know that Helen and Vicky were, and they did a good job in answering the questions and explain the context. In response to the 3 recommendations, you will see we are broadly in favour of them. It's more a matter of where they're going. And we have agreed that in recommendation 1 and 3, we'll look at that in relation to the Council Citizen and Community Engagement Policy, which is scheduled to come to Cabinet in September. If we didn't do that, we'd be waiting 2 years to do anything about this, which is a long time. So it's best to do it there. And on AI, we are bringing forward a future AI strategy in its complete roundness. And again, for the same reason, that's the right place for us to consider this matter rather than waiting for another 2 years. So we're sort of with you in spirit, but the exact mechanism of how and where we were suggesting and agreeing to do it slightly differently from the way the committee suggested. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nigel. Back for the last one, I think, Alex. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this is a summary from the Housing and Homelessness Working Group. So the working group met on the 24th of June, and they considered 2 cabinet reports. So they considered the National Homelessness Property Fund and the annual review of housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. So on the National Homelessness Property Fund, the working group did not make any recommendations, and they agreed that the sensible next step is to roll over investments into the Evergreen Fund in September. Given that there were no recommendations on that one, I'll continue straight to the second, which was the annual review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. On this, the group agreed 2 recommendations which have subsequently been endorsed by scrutiny. The first was for Cabinet to continue lobbying against changes that would significantly reduce local government funding for homelessness services, particularly in places like Oxford, where we have high levels of homelessness. And the second was for Council to explore all measures to protect tenants from revenge evictions until the time that the Renters' Rights Bill is passed. The group did also note, although it's not a formal recommendation, that there could be a minor contextual improvement to action P2-1. So the target was to ensure that all property license applications are processed and completed, not just the majority. But I stress that one was not a formal recommendation, whereas the preceding two were.
Thanks very much, Alex. Linda.
Thank you. Yeah, so both of the formal recommendations were agreed. There's very fulsome comments there in the papers as well, which set out how we are already on it and very active in terms of doing what the panel was asking us to do in both cases. When it comes to the minor contextual amendment, that will be picked up. Officers have delegated powers to update the document with small changes like that throughout the year, and so that will be picked up.
Lovely, thank you very much. And thanks very much, as always, Alex, for the work of scrutiny. Sounds like there's some really good discussions there, as there often are. So we're very grateful for the work of scrutiny. As always, you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, should you wish, or to leave as you wish. So thank you very much for your time. Right, we are now back on the substantive agenda. And item 8 is the appointment to outside bodies 2025-6. And everyone here will know that it's my favourite time of the year, because this is my all-time favourite report. I'm hoping that you've all got lots of lovely complicated questions for us, but no, I'm sure you haven't. I'd like to move the report, which is to approve the appointments to charities, trusts, community associations and other organisations as set out in the various appendices. I think the only thing I would like to say is a huge thank you to Jonathan and to officers who've helped pull together the report. It does change every year because organisations change, both in their demands from us and so on. I think one thing I would like to ask all members who are being appointed to these outside bodies through this report to do is to report back to Jonathan and others if they are not receiving invitations to meetings. I'm very happy to shorten this report in future years by having fewer bodies on it if it turns out that actually members are not being invited to these organisations. There is very little point in us putting down on paper an appointment which doesn't actually mean anything because nobody's actually being engaged with. The point of these appointments is to try and make sure that there is a liaison between elected members of this council and these various different outside bodies. And I know that many of these relationships are very good ones and add real value to both the outside organisations and to the council. But as I said, if that's not happening, please do let me and Jonathan know so that we can either try and put that right or just not bother in future years if that seems to be the preferred approach. So that being said, I would like to move the report. I'm happy to take any questions or comments if there are any. Good. Was hoping there would not be. So in which case, can we just move to approve the recommendations and the appointments? Thank you all very much. Phew, over for another year. Right. So item 9 is the community lettings report. And we have, this is Ed's report and Emma is online, I think. Yes, sorry. You're on the top of my screen. I couldn't see you there, but so Ed, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, sure. And incidentally, Councillor Arshad apologises for needing to leave. I'll pick up briefly her report later on the agenda. This report concerns the community centres that we manage directly and where organisations have space within those premises. And clearly, when we as the council, just like when we release funds, really, when we release an asset, we need to do so in a way which is sort of transparent and justifiable, because of course, ultimately, these are public assets. That means that we ought really, when we're letting space out, to have a clear policy. So that's the starting point. And we do charge organisations a rent. People don't get space for free. What we, I think, need to do as well is then set an appropriate, if you like, market rent for space in our community organisations. But colleagues will need to bear in mind that the market rent for a space will depend on how that space is used. So if I've got a shop, then the market rent will be potentially higher for some uses than it will be for others. If I have an office, depending on what I permit the office to be used for, then the rent will be higher for some uses than others. And so what we're proposing here is that we have three bands of market rents reflecting different values that can be attached to them. So you've got those organisations which are commercial, and then there's a rent charge there, depending on the nature of the space. Then those which are medium-sized charities and not-for-profit, and then smaller charities and not-for-profit. And we remain very, very keen, actually, to have small and medium-sized charities in our community centres. They often provide a very valuable service for local people. They're very, very much what our community centres are about, but still we need to release the space in a transparent way. I think this is all the more important because of the two new community centres that we're building to get things off on a good footing. Now, this will mean some changes for some organisations. In some cases, the changes are pretty minimal. In others, they're more substantial. But of course, also, just as we do in some other instances, we could then offer a grant. But the great thing about doing that, well, we charge a market rent, and then we make a grant to assist with the cost of that, is that it's transparent, and it does actually mean it sort of surfaces the decision for the council. Is this something that we want to be supporting, and we can weigh it against other competing priorities? And that seems only fair for other organisations that aren't getting premises from ourselves. So this really regularizes things. I think it's long been members' ambition to have these arrangements in place, have this transparency. And it applies in many instances elsewhere in the council's property portfolio, but we want to make sure that it happens here too. And what we also propose is that these things are sort of phased in, so where there is a significant impact on what an organisation's paying, that we give time to adjust. And again, that's actually what we would normally do in our commercial portfolio, for instance, when there are changes. So I'd like to move the report on that basis. I'd also like to colleagues to note that there's the confidential appendix, and if people have any questions on that, then clearly we'll need to go into confidential session, but perhaps that won't be necessary. Emma can now explain anything that I've missed or needs to be added to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Ed. Emma, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, that was a really thorough summary, so I haven't got anything else to add, and happy to take questions on anything on the public paper.
Thanks very much, Emma. Firstly, let me check. Does anyone need to ask any questions on the confidential paper? No, good. Well, that makes life easier. And are there any questions or comments on the report as it is? Alex.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment, it's not a question, just about the transparency and the importance of this. I mean, this is a really important way of making sure that we're absolutely clear what revenues and costs the council has and who is paying them, and being upfront about it. And I think it's something that's really important as a principle. Just makes it much clearer. So yeah, I'm very enthusiastic to see this happen. I know it's been something of a battle getting through the vast amounts of legal paperwork that accompanies this kind of thing, but yeah, really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. Any other further comments or questions? No, in which case can we note that it's already moved the report. Can we approve it? The policy as set out in Appendix 1. Good. That's unanimous. Thanks very much, everybody. And thanks very much, Emma. We are now on to item 10 on the agenda, which is the Citizen Experience Strategy Refresh for 2025 to 27. And that is Nigel. And we also have Vicky and Helen online as well. So over to you, Nigel.
You do indeed. I'm sure they will answer perhaps more detailed questions, because they're both massive enthusiasts and have had a lot of input into this strategy refresh. This is a refresh in the sense that we are, as I said earlier on in answering scrutiny's comments, midway through the 4-year term for this strategy. So I always like to sort of do a review to see how we're getting on, really. And I think we've done some really good work here. The ambition of the strategy was to deliver modern, inclusive and accessible services in a way that no one was left behind. And again, going back to the scrutiny comment about sort of moving towards digital, I think we have handled the whole transition so far pretty well. So we still have extensive face-to-face services for people who have particularly complex and complicated stories that need unraveling and support offering to them, particularly in relation to debt and housing. We have an extensive and good customer service centre, obviously using access through telephone and so on. And then we have increasing digital access through a new revamped website. So I think we've made good progress over the last 2 years, and we're getting the balance right. And we have to be careful about no one being left behind, i.e. moving so fast to digital that we have whole swathes of the population who just can't access our services. So there are 4 strands in the policy, really, effectively: citizen-focused, positive experience, inclusive access, and getting it right first time. There is, a limit to what we can do about inclusive access in terms of training people. We are doing quite a lot of outreach at community centres, our community centres, and with the NHS. But there's a limit to what we can do about that. But we, by providing these alternative means that I talked about earlier on, we mitigate the risk that people feel cut off. Independent analysis of our performance, which we get every year, is pretty positive about it. Particularly positive about the telephony and the face-to-face services. A bit less about the online service. I think there's some more work to do there. And we have plans to go to a new phase of development for the website, particularly around paying for services, translation services, which again scrutiny alluded to earlier on. And so that will be part of the next phase. And this strategy is more transactional, I would say, than the citizen and the community engagement strategy, which is sort of the other half of the story. And that is coming later on down the line this autumn, and you need to put them side by side, really see the whole picture. But pleased with the work, taking it very seriously, have high quality standards, not perfect, definitely not perfect, but compared to many, many councils, when we actually compare our performance, and we do every month, we usually are in the top 10 of councils in England and Wales, which is quite impressive, really. So on that basis, I commend the report to Cabinet.
Thanks very much, Nigel. And Vicky and Helen, did you want to add anything?
Nothing further for me to add, thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks, Chair.
Well, thanks very much. I was just going to say that having sort of followed this work quite closely from the outset, having had this responsibility in my own Cabinet portfolio previously, it is really important. I think it's quite interesting that I think when we first started out sort of moving some services online, I think we were sort of trying to take people with us. And now I think we're trying to keep up with people's appetite for online services. And I think there has been a real change in the way that people want to access services. So I think that's the challenge for us now. I think equally the challenge is very much making sure that people can access those online services on a mobile phone, because that will absolutely be the way that most people are accessing it, rather than on a laptop or a desktop computer. And I know you know all of these things, but I also worry that increasingly, going onto the topic of AI, that it's AI that when people search online for our services, that is going to be giving them the answers. And that's not always accurate, and it's not always right. So everything that we can do to try and make sure that the information that we have got up on our website and anywhere else online is accurate is really, really important, because that's what AI is searching for. And sometimes it doesn't come back with the right results for people. Anyway, that's just my ponderings on the subject for what it's worth. Are there any other questions or statements, Ed?
I've got a really predictable question, Nigel. We'll see it coming, but just, I mean, it was on the financial implications of this, and the report just says the strategies within. Helen may have a reflection on this, or Nigel Kennedy. It says there are no financial implications beyond the MTFS, but I just wondered if we felt like we were on course to meet our kind of budget position in this sort of area this year at the moment.
Yeah, I believe we are. I mean, I think the savings are relatively modest, frankly, in this area at the moment. And that's fair enough, because we could make savings faster, but then we would lead to have more people who are left out. So that's the tension we're managing right here. And I know my colleagues feel strongly about the digitally disadvantaged, quite rightly. And therefore we have to have the right backup services, and those are sometimes more expensive usually, because they involve more people. Usually the telephony, and particularly face-to-face, is time intensive. Having said that, though, I would say it's actually money worth spending. Because if you've got somebody coming to the Westgate Library with multiple debt and housing issues, you know, and they owe money to the various parts of the council, it's worth investing that money into that particular case, because you're likely to have a proper plan at the end of it, where the person can pay you back over time and avoid some ghastly thing like being evicted because they haven't paid their council rent or whatever. So it's worth, you know, you've got to keep the balance going, and you've got to keep those specialist services around. So I could, in theory, save more money, but I wouldn't be necessarily keen to, because I think the denigration of service would not accept it, not be right.
Thanks, Nigel. Are there any further questions or comments? No? Okay, in which case, can we approve the citizen experience strategy and the accompanying action plan? Agreed. Thank you very much, everybody. Lovely. And thank you very much for your work on that, Helen and Vicky. So it's a good strategy. So if we could move on to another strategy, which is the annual review of the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. So over to Linda, and we're also being joined by Stephen and Richard, both here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so Cabinet will know that we have a 5-year housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. This report looks back at the previous year on how we've fared against that strategy, and asks us to agree an action plan for the current year, year 3. So it's a really good report. It's always a pleasure to read, and like see how much work has been achieved across all the different areas that housing spans. Some personal highlights. So in the more affordable homes section, you know, we're exceeding our target on the delivery of homes for social rent, as well as working with the districts to supply more affordable housing, as well as buying homes and working with landlords to make the private rented sector more accessible for people that need a home. Under Great Homes for All, there's really good work taking place in terms of the transformation of our own landlord services. We're coming on leaps and bounds in terms of getting the stock condition survey done, which is going to be really useful for us in terms of planning future investment. And I'm really proud of the work of the residential regulation team as well, overseeing what's the most comprehensive licensing scheme for the private rented sector in the whole country. When it comes to moving towards net zero, OX Place is building homes, you know, far above building regulations in terms of keeping carbon emissions down. On preventing homelessness, you'll remember that the Housing Needs team won the Local Government Chronicle Award for Housing Team of the Year, which we're all really proud of. I can say that once again. And the report covers all the work that's happening to expand services, as well as working smarter, and all the brilliant work that's being done to mitigate the unprecedented demands that we've got in terms of people presenting as homeless and requiring temporary accommodation from the council. And then the last priority, number 5, is ending rough sleeping. And again, we've seen a decline in the street count, which is something to be pleased about. And I'm really proud of the work we're doing to expand the Housing First programme. And I don't think those two things are unrelated. So yes, commend the report, and Stephen and Richard are here to mention anything else that I haven't mentioned and answer any difficult questions.
Thanks, Linda. Stephen and Richard, over to you. Anything you want to add at this stage? Okay, open it up to questions and comments then. Oh, Linda, your mic's still on. Thanks. No? Nobody? Well, I mean, it's a really thorough and incredibly good report, and I think Linda did a very good job of introducing all of the really key and important elements of it. So I think we would all just like to commend you for the work that's ongoing. I mean, it's obviously an incredibly important area of work for us as a council. We're all really committed to tackling Oxford's extreme housing problems, and particularly when they're at the sharpest end in terms of homelessness and rough sleeping. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. If there are no questions and comments, then I suggest we move straight to the recommendation, which is to note the progress that's made and to approve the adoption of the new strategy action plan for year 3. And to delegate authority to update the action plan when required. Is everyone happy to make those recommendations? Fantastic. Now don't move, because actually it seems to me to make much better sense if we just do the National Homelessness Property Fund one next while you're here at the table, and Liz will come to you in a minute. So let's do item 13, which is the National Homelessness Property Fund. Sorry, Linda, over to you again, and Ed. I don't know which one of you is leading on this one.
Oh yes, I did.
Yeah. Sorry, I've confused everything now.
Sorry, right, not at all. So we have an investment in the National Homelessness Property Fund. We want to continue to retain our nomination rights to that fund. We've received some returns on investment. And it's important that we do, because of course with our current temporary accommodation pressures, then the ability to nominate people to these properties is really very important. Exiting or seeking to exit for the fund would be difficult at the moment in policy terms, but also it would be disadvantageous to us. You'll see different options being set out there, and the recommended option is to roll over into a new fund, which will keep it going. We have other options. One would involve increased investment, and we can keep that under review. But we've got other irons in the fire in terms of reducing temporary accommodation as well, and that may not be the right route. Seeking to exit would be a risky strategy in terms of financial and impact outcomes for reasons which are set out in the report. So that essentially is the recommendation: continue the investment that we have, roll it forward. There's a lot of discussion about the detailed financial implications, which we can drill down into if we need. But I think this is, if we take a step back, these are properties which we've invested in, procured. We'd like to continue using them, and exiting from them would be not only disadvantageous at the moment financially, but also it would be a real difficulty in supporting people who need to have the accommodation. So that's why I'd like to move the recommendations.
Thanks very much, Ed. Stephen and Richard, anything you want to add?
Just to agree with the advantages just set out by Councillor. It makes financial sense for the council. There's a continued likelihood of the returns coming in from the investment, but at the same time, obviously there won't be the immediate impact of homelessness if we were to pull out of the fund, and we retain the continued nomination rights for the years ahead. So we continue to relieve homelessness through this investment.
Thanks very much. I mean, it does feel like it's a largely financial report, but I think as has rightly been pulled out, there are important housing elements to it as well. Any questions, Alex?
Yeah, completely agree with the recommendation of the options. I just had a question about one of the not quite recommended options, which is option 2, with the rollover and the increased investment. I'm assuming I may have missed the detail of exactly when the timing of this is, because obviously we need to complete our review of a whole range of options and pressures and things, and that's going to take much more time than it's going to take to get to September. Will the fund have a series of fixed buy-in notes? I see that's being nodded to. Shall I shut up so you can say yes?
So in the last update with Resonance, the people who manage the fund, the intention is for the Evergreen Fund to launch at the end of the year. We may be in a position that if we did want to make further investments, we could return to that question later in the year through the right governance routes ahead of that. But the indication from the fund is that there will then be further opportunities to do that as in the years ahead. So that's one of the benefits of the flexibility of the fund.
Thank you. That's very helpful to understand. Okay. Any further questions or comments? No, in which case, can we approve the recommendations as set out in the report? Thank you very much. And thank you both very much indeed as well. Now, Councillor Arshad has had to leave, but Councillor Turner has very kindly agreed to present the report, ably supported by someone who probably knows a great deal more about it than he does. So if I hand over to you, Ed, and then I'm sure that you will you'll be very well supported by Liz on this.
Yeah, so. I think I might be. It is. So we, as part of our Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation, which we hope to achieve, this is an area which we're passionate about as a council, supporting people who've experienced domestic abuse with their housing situation. We need to have a domestic abuse policy for service users, and that's been drawn up. The objectives are listed in paragraph 6 of the covering report and seem very, very sensible. And it's also welcome that there's been good input from survivors of domestic abuse, as well as from others in the sector, and indeed a public consultation. I suppose in teeing Liz up to say anything else, there were two things where if Liz, you were able to say 1 or 2 words, it'd be really appreciated. I think one is whether we would expect any change to what we currently do to flow from this, or whether you think it's more formalising our current way of working in a policy, if you see what I mean. And also, I seem to remember in the housing press, there was talk of some new government legislative initiatives in this area, specifically about changing local connection rules for survivors of domestic abuse. And I just wondered if there was anything you wanted to flag to us there in your remarks. But yeah, that was it.
Thanks very much, Ed. And Liz, thank you very much. If I could hand over to you if there's anything you want to add, which there may well be. Thank you. Just need to press your button on. Sorry. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much. Thank you for presenting this. I was a bit worried then, thinking it might have to be me. I'm trying to remember. Yes, the policy is around formalising our process. We've done a lot of work through the DAHA to look at our processes and procedures and improve our response to domestic abuse. And I'll give a little quote. Yesterday, I met with our domestic abuse specialist services, and they said they've seen a much better improvement in their engagement with the City Council over the last couple of years, and they're really pleased, and they've got some excellent officers who are responding well to housing when victims have tried to flee. So that was really unsolicited. And the local connection rules, I'm glad, but yeah, domestic abuse, if you're fleeing domestic abuse, local connection is not something that should be considered. We are aware that certain areas still ask for that, but actually they're not allowed to anymore. So it's a priority need now if you're a domestic abuse survivor and wanting to leave. Can I just add one other thing? From the scrutiny panel, there was a recommendation that came through with regards to people with insecure immigration status and they're victims of domestic abuse, and that's a barrier to coming forward and reporting because they think they're going to be reported to the Home Office, etc. And although we do mention in the policy insecure immigration status, we've added another barrier in to say fear of deportation. So if service users are seeing this, they know that we're very much aware of the fact that that is an actual fear, and we will do our best to support them through that.
Thank you. I don't know if you were here earlier, but Councillor Elshed did address the scrutiny recommendation. She was here earlier on, but no, thank you for repeating that. As that's really helpful. Are there any questions or comments from Cabinet members? No, I don't see any. Well, thank you very much, Liz. It's a good report, a good policy. It's a really important work, which we're very committed to as a Cabinet and a Council. So I think we can just move to the recommendations, in which case, which is to approve the domestic abuse policy for service users and to delegate authority to the domestic abuse lead to make minor changes in future to reflect any relevant changes in legislation, guidance or practice, which, as you were referencing, Ed, might come up over the next sort of few months or over a longer period. Everyone happy to agree those recommendations? Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Liz. Great, okay, we're moving on through the agenda. The next item is an item for Councillor Railton, and it's a response to a motion that came to Council, I believe.
It is, yes. So this is a short paper in response to a motion on the 25th of November last year. It lays out the existing and ongoing work to make Oxford a better walkable city. There was a very specific ask in the motion around producing a walking map, of which this paper offers 3 options. The first option is designing and producing such a map in-house. Second is outsourcing such a process, and the third is not producing such a map at all. In the appendix, you will find a list of all the existing sort of walking guides, both in print and online. So, and given there is no budget allocated for this, we are recommending the third option, which is to not produce such a map. The paper also briefly outlines other actions we have taken in this space. So in March this year, we wrote to Heidi Alexander MP, Secretary of State for Transport, about the results of the 2020 pavement parking consultation. This is a mental note to myself to chase up what the response to that letter was, because I don't think I've seen one. We've also asked the County Council about a curbside strategy for the city, which was another ask for the motion. And note there is a small budget line in the county's budget for this ongoing year for that. It lays out discussions we've had with the county around dropped curbs, which is a special interest of mine, and lists various bits of investment in infrastructure in the city, which I will not read out in detail. So yes, I recommend. So there are two recommendations here. I'd also like to say thank you to Clive, and I believe this is maybe his first paper. So yes, that is all I have.
Thank you very much, Anna. Any questions or comments? Ed.
Thanks. Anna and I've been in touch with this, but there's a question at council about the money we got in our budget around pavement works. It's useful for me to say half a sentence on that. We had a budget amendment quite late in the day, which reflected, I think, the importance that councillors across the chamber sort of attached to this area of work. Officers have had some dialogue with the mover of that kind of budget amendment to understand what was in mind. This year, I think they're planning to they've got some outstanding requests for pavement works at ODS, which previously couldn't be funded, but to improve accessibility, they're planning to use them for that. The money for that, and then in future years that may be possible to take a more strategic approach because the money was in for several years. So I hope that's useful and supports what Anna was saying, and I certainly support the recommendation not to spend money duplicating things.
Thank you. Nigel.
Yeah, I think it's a good paper and a good response. And actually, I think it's just a more general point, really, which is often we do have motions in councils, don't we, which ask various things to be done. It's very easy for them to sort of slip through the cracks, actually, and not have a proper monitoring process of the progress of them. And this is, I think, is a very good piece of practice going on here. So I think that's right. You know, if people go to the trouble of passing those motions and they feel about these things passionately, then it's our job to make sure that we either explain, you know, what we can do and what we can't do and what we can afford, and not just have radio silence on it. So I think it's a good thing to have this sort of report.
Thanks, Nigel. Any other questions or comments? No, in which case, can we approve the recommendations, which are to note the motion and not to support the production of a new plan? Thank you very much. We are now on to item 15, which is the post-print contract retender. That's a nuttily entitled report. So, Nigel, over to you.
Thank you very much. You know how to sell them. But
Helen's here to support you.
Yeah, thank you. Helen, as ever, is always here to support me, and she's doing a great job. The words that are interesting is that obviously the postage and printing contract is actually the hybrid bit, which is the most interesting thing I think about this report, actually, because it's hybrid in the sense that people are now increasingly working from home. So days when they would, you know, produce all these paper letters and take them down to the post room and get them sent off. We're living in a completely different world now. And they have to be able to send them electronically and have them dispatched. And this contract is intended to be able to do that. Secondly, the other thing is, reading it again, it is about postage and printing. It's also about using digital means to contact people. So SMS, email, all of that, it's not the only way. And also to alert people who have joined our various portals that the correspondence they wish to read is actually sitting in the portal, and therefore they don't need to have it sent to their home address, costing us more money. So that's why it's a hybrid contract. The hybrid bit is the most interesting part of it. The current contract runs out on the 31st of October. I think Helen is going to come in a second and just talk a bit about the timing. There are some issues around getting the procurement process going, but essentially this is a request to Cabinet, because of the scale of the investment and the cost of the contract, to agree that sort of funds can be spent on this. We absolutely need it. I mean, if we stopped doing this, we'd have thousands of people who weren't getting any correspondence, either digital or physical, from us around everything from council tax to their rent situation, which would be pretty catastrophic. So we need to do this, and therefore we need to get on and procure the contract and get on with that process as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Helen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just as Councillor Chapman has said, I just refer you to para 17 in the report, where there's a high-level timetable. This may need to be pushed back slightly due to unfortunate and unforeseen staff absence. The timetable's already tight, with the contract expiring at the 31st of October, but I have sought counsel from our procurement colleagues and found a way that we can actually facilitate essentially an extension of an additional few months with our incumbent supplier, which will buy us a bit more time to enable us to do the procurement exercise. So I just wanted to say that while you're considering the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask why we are doing this so late in the process? If the contract's about to expire in October, and this is a very tight timetable for that, is there a reason why we didn't actually start this process a little earlier?
No, unfortunately, it's just the way life has panned out. I'm afraid it has been exacerbated by staff absence as well.
Okay, I mean, I just think we've had this rather frequently with contracts. I hope we can have a good look at all of the council contracts to make sure that we are starting procurement processes a little earlier in the day, because it's not helpful for anybody if you are having to go through processes with very tight timetables and extending contracts, which is another sort of another thing to add to the pressures of letting a contract. So I think that we will not be doing our job if we didn't sort of push back slightly on this and say that we do need to be looking at that. Nigel, I can see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to give a bit of assurance around that, we've recently introduced a business partner role for procurement. We have, under the new procurement regulations, we're also required to produce a procurement pipeline. We're ramping up the training around contract management as well. And I think through the business partnering, basically, we can have a better oversight of contracts that are coming up, and certainly be nudging managers to sort of, can we get onto this one? I think, as Helen said, in this particular instance, it just fell by the wayside. There are 2 staff that were involved in this, and unfortunately, both of them are currently on ill health absence, basically. So we just couldn't push this one over the line. But in terms of signposting and pushing things forward, I can give you assurances that we will improve on that, given the new business partner arrangements in the procurement team.
Thank you. That's really reassuring to hear. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate that these things do happen. And if you've got staff sickness, then, there are always going to be sort of some instances where things do fall through the gaps. Okay. Anybody got any other questions or comments? No. In which case, can we move to the recommendations, which are to give project approval for the procurement of a hybrid print and post contract to replace the existing contract, and delegate authority to take any decisions and actions required in the meantime as well. Everyone happy to agree that? Thank you. That's unanimous. So thanks very much, Helen, and thank you, Nigel, as well. We're now on to nearly the final item on the agenda. So sorry to have kept you waiting, Melissa. Someone had to be last, and it looked like it was you, so I'm sorry about that. Over to Nigel again for the Direct Award for Apprenticeship Training.
Yeah, thank you very much, Susan. Interesting, again, this is about language to some extent. When people think about apprenticeship training, they think about people doing a trade, or they think about a full-time amount of training, say in the planning team or in legal or wherever. We've had those examples already in the council. This is quite innovative, actually. This is a way of training as apprentices in commas, really, I would put it that way. About 100 staff in the council, so getting on for 120 out of 700 in AI, data and business intelligence skills. And I think it's a really good way of doing it, because those people are meshed inside their own individual areas of activity, and therefore they're much more likely to know how what needs to be done to improve the services, and then they're curious and interested in learning how to apply AI and data and business intelligence to do that. You could take a very different approach to this and say I'm a massive AI unit, which did stuff, but I've always been wary about that in other walks of life, because they get separate from the businesses themselves or the units themselves that are doing most of the work. So this is a very neat way of doing it. 33 staff have so far been trained. We're 88 coming down the line, and the feedback is very, very positive. And the other good thing about it is that Melissa, who's an absolute sort of dynamic individual, can I just say, did a fantastic job in training, has managed to persuade other employers who haven't spent their apprenticeship levy to spend it with us. So not only are we spending our own levy, but we're getting levy from other people, which is fantastic, which is able to expand this. So I think it's a really clever, innovative way of doing it. There's obviously a good relationship with Multiverse Group already established, and that is why the paper is asking us to award the contract without competition to them, and to carry on expanding this activity. And I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the specific actions that flow from this investment to improve our services, devised by the people who are at the centre of them, rather than classic thing would be bringing a load of management consultants in to do it. Often they'll say the people who know best how to run things are the people who actually have to do it every day. And if management only listens to them, things usually get better. So on that basis, I commend the paper to you.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Melissa, entirely endorse everything that Nigel just said about you. So to thoroughly embarrass you. So do add your comments and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to echo, Nigel, that we've had some great successes from the initial 33 people on the programme. And not only are they learning themselves, but they're also passing learning on to others. So we're using their skills to collaborate with people in the organisation like change agents so that they can share their knowledge and pass this on. I want to give some comfort to councillors and colleagues that I know sometimes there's fear with AI about sort of safety of it, and the whole point of this training has got its ethical and safe use of AI embedded into it, which is really important. So we know that our colleagues are going out there and sort of dabbling with AI anyway, so let's make sure they know how to use it safely and effectively. And then the other comfort I want to give is that we've investing a significant amount into this, obviously from the apprenticeship levy, but we are still focusing on other areas for apprenticeship upskilling as well. So we've got a cohort of 6 new typical apprentices across different service areas coming in, hopefully starting in September. And we've also got other apprenticeships with other providers, such as chartered town planners, procurement and supply chain, building control, arboriculturists. So although this is a big corporate central piece of work, I just want to give comfort that it's not the only work that we're doing in terms of apprenticeships at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And you mentioned the magic words, so now Alex needs to declare an interest, I think.
Yeah, as somebody who teaches some chartered town planning degree apprentices at Oxford Brookes, I need to declare an interest. Do I need to leave the room? No, okay. Do I need to not vote? It's not covered by the report, it was only in the...
Yeah,
okay.
I think it was just mentioned in passing by Melissa as some of the other work that we do. So I think it's not covered by the report. So, but yeah, thank you for registering that. Excellent. Questions or comments on the report? It's an excellent report. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing on apprenticeships. I wish there was more work like this going on in the city more generally. I think it's an absolute model for what should be happening. And I'm hoping that we can, over time, expand it to other employers in the city. I think this is, you know, we need to be giving people more lifelong training opportunities and making it clear that there are lots of different ways of learning. I think that apprenticeships are absolutely vital to that. So I'm really pleased with this report. If there are no other questions or comments, then I suggest we move to the recommendations, which are to approve the award of the contract and to delegate the relevant to the relevant people to award further contracts if required. Is everyone happy with those recommendations?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Melissa. Keep up the good work. So I think that takes us on to the final item on the agenda, which is the minutes of the last cabinet meeting on the 18th of June. Can we agree them as an accurate record? Yep, okay. And are there any matters arising? No. In which case, I think that is it on the agenda. Just falls to me to remind you that the next meeting of cabinet is on 13th of August. So I think just a single item agenda cabinet. So hopefully we will see you, at least some of you then. Let me know your apologies. Thank you very much, everybody. And I